Last chancers. So, recap of everything that's happened so far. In the first book is they destroyed Court Norm. 4,000 men reduced to 4 so that they could destroy Court Norm. Cage has completed his mission. He got sent back to jail. So now his next adventure begins. The air was filled with swirling gray dust, whipped up into a storm by a wind that shrieked across the hard, black granite of the tower. The bleak edifice soared to the turbulent skies, windowless but studded with hundreds of blazing lights, whose yellow beams were swallowed quickly by the dust storm. For 300 meters, the tower climbed into the raging skies of Govil's third moon, an almost perfect cylinder of unbroken and unforgiving rock, hewn from the infertile mesa in which the Gulag stood. A narrow-beamed red laser sprang into life from its summit, penetrating the gloom of the dust-shrouded night. A moment later, it was answered by a triangle of white glares as a shuttle descended towards the landing pad. In the bathing glow of the landing lights, technicians scurried back and forth across the pad, protected against the violent climate with bulky work suits made from a fine metal mesh, their hands covered with heavy gloves, thick-soled boots upon their feet. With a whine of engines cutting back, the shuttle's 3 feet touched down with a loud clang on the metal decking of the landing area. A moment later, a portal in the side swung open and a docking ramp jerkily extended itself on hissing hydraulics to meet with the hatchway. A tall figure ducked to the low opening and stepped through the walkway. He stood there for a moment, his heavy dress coat whipping around him, a gloved hand clamping the officer's cap to his head. With his back as straight as a rod despite the horrendous conditions, the new arrival strode across the docking gantry with a purposeful gait, never once breaking his gaze from directly ahead of him. Inside, a black-clad guard saluted the man and without a word gestured for him to proceed to the open work iron elevator just inside the landing pad building. With a creak of rusty hinges, the warden swung the doors shut and jerked a lever to start the conveyance descending with a rattling of chains and grinding of gears. "Which level is the prisoner on?" the officer asked, speaking for the first time since his arrival. His voice was deep and quiet, the authoritative tone of a man used to being obeyed without question. "Level 16, sir," the guard replied, not meeting the piercing blue gaze of the officer. "One of the isolation floors," he added hesitantly. The visitor did not reply, but merely nodded. The lift rattled on for a couple more minutes, passing slowly down through the floor after floor, an illuminated dial marking their descent. When it reached 17, the guard hauled back on the lever, and a moment later the shaft echoed with the screech of badly oiled brakes. The elevator shuddered to a halt a few seconds later. The officer glanced up at the floor indicator, which now was shining through number 16. "The tech priest promised to look at it, sir, but they say they are too busy," the warden answered apologetically at the officer's questioning glance. The prison guard was old and haggard, with thinning, tobacco-stained white hair and an ill-fitting uniform. Coughing self-consciously, the guard flung the doors open with more screeching and stepped out of the way. The level onto which the man stepped was as round as the tower itself. Heavy armored doors spaced evenly throughout its wall. Everything was the color of aging whitewash, a pale gray stained in places, with patches of reddish brown. "It's this one, sir," the guard said, walking around to the right of the elevator door when he realized the officer was waiting for directions. Another guard, younger and sturdier than the one who had been waiting at the landing pad, was standing by one of the doors, dressed in the same black uniform, a heavy cudgel hanging from his belt. The first guard led the officer over to the door and flipped down a small viewing window. The smell of stale sweat swept out of the small grill, but the officer's face remained impassive as he gazed through the narrow slit. And said inside the cell was bare as the hall outside, painted in the same drab color. Only a few meters square, the room was illuminated by a single glow globe set into the ceiling behind a wire mesh. Its lackluster yellow light cast a jaundiced tinge across the room's occupant. He was stretched out on the far wall, wrists manacled to the corners of the ceiling with heavy linked chains. His feet were similarly restrained to the floor. His head hung down against his chest, his features hidden by a long, bed-wrangled mane of unkempt hair. He was clad in nothing but a rag about his waist, the dim light showing his taut, sinewy muscles. His chest was crisscrossed with scars, some new, others years old. His arms were similarly disfigured, a particularly prominent slash across the upper right arm obscuring what was left of a tattoo. His left thigh was marked on both sides by large puncture scars from a wound that had obviously passed completely through his leg. "Why was he moved here?" the officer asked quietly, his voice causing the prisoner to stir slightly. "In the first month he was here, he killed 7 wardens and 5 other prisoners, and almost escaped, sir," the older guard explained, casting a nervous glance through the slit and exchanging a look with the other guard. "The commandant has had him confined to isolation for the past 5 months for the safety of the other inmates and guards, sir." The officer nodded, and for a fleeting second, the warden thought he saw what looked like a satisfied smile across his lips. "And his mental condition?" the man asked, moving his gaze from the warden back to the cell. "The surgeon has examined him twice and has declared him psychopathic, sir," the guard replied after a moment. "He seems to hate everyone. He refuses to eat anything except protein gruel. The only time he allows us near him is when we take him down to the exercise hall. We can't allow him in there with other prisoners, though, and no one is allowed to carry anything that might be turned into a weapon in his presence. We learned that when he tried to escape." The officer nodded back, an eyebrow raised in query. "Nobody thought to count the spoons in the mess hall." The man turned his attention back to the cell once more. "Perfect," he whispered to himself. "Open the door," he ordered the younger of the 2 guards before stepping back to one side. As the sullen, dark-haired warden did as he was told, the door screeching open, the prisoner looked up for the first time. Like the rest of his body, his face was a mass of scars. A long beard hung over his chest. The warden's look was returned by a venomous stare, hatred burning in the dark eyes of the inmate, a feral intensity shining in them. The second guard took up position on the other side of the prisoner, dragging his heavy club free and holding it easily in his right hand. "Now the manacles," the officer prompted. "I don't think that's a good idea, sir," the aging guard replied with a startled look. The prisoner's eyes hadn't moved, continuing to burn straight through the warden. "Sir?" The prison official replied with a horrified stare. "Did you hear what he told you about this animal?" "He is not an animal," the officer snapped back. "The manacles!" Visibly shaking, the white-haired warden crept forward and fumbled with the ring of keys. The other guard followed him, dragging his cudgel free from his belt. Hesitantly, the crouching guard unlocked the left leg first, flinching nervously, expecting the foot to lash out at him. A bit more confident, he unlocked the other leg. He glanced up at the prisoner's face, but the inmate's gaze had not left the face of the other security men. Quickly, he undid the wrist locks and took a couple hurried steps back, ready to bolt. The prisoner took a step forward, rubbing his arms to revive circulation. Then, without a word, the inmate stepped to his left, his right hand lashing out, sending the maul spinning from the younger warden's grasp, who yelped and clutched his broken wrist. The other guard stepped forward, but the prisoner was quicker, twisting on his heel to deliver a spinning kick to his midriff, hurling him back against the wall with a thud and a hoarse cry of pain. The guard with the mangled wrist had recovered now, but the prisoner turned his attention back to him, smashing rigid fingers into his throat, then wrapping his arm around the guard's neck in a headlock. There was an audible crack as the guard's neck snapped, and the prisoner gave a satisfied grunt as he let the body slump to the floor. He took a step towards the surviving warden and was about to repeat the move when the officer stepped into the room. "That is enough, I think," the officer said quietly, and the prisoner looked around, a wolfish grin of savage joy splitting his scarred face. "I'm fragging happy to see you, Colonel," the prisoner said, laughing hoarsely. "Do you need me again?" "Yes, I need you again, Cage," the colonel replied. I guess that's a cool part about their dynamics is Schaefer and Cage never really truly get along. Damn it. Okay, I'm stuck in a terrible traffic. Yeah, that is a cool dynamic between them. It is with a mixture of relief and dread that I look at the colonel. On the one hand, the fact that he's here means an end to 6 months of misery and boredom. On the other, his presence means I could be dead anytime soon. I've been hoping for and dreading this moment for half a year, torn between expectation and apprehension. All in all, I'm pleased to see him, though, because I'd rather take my chances with the colonel than rot in this damn cell for the rest of my life. He just stands there, looking exactly the same as he did the first time I saw him. As if he'd just come back, and after a moment, rather than having abandoned me for nearly 200 days to stare at 4 blank walls. "Get him cleaned up and then bring him to the audience chamber," Schaefer tells the guard curtly, giving me a final glance before turning and striding back out of the door. "You heard the officer," the warden prods me into life as I stand there, staring at the colonel's retreating back. He casts a nervous glance at the corpse in the corner of the cell and takes a step away from me, his eyes wary, hand hovering close to the pistol at his belt. I follow him to the lift and wait there in silence for a few minutes, while the elevator takes the colonel back to the top of the tower. My mind is racing. What does the colonel have in store for me? What's the mission this time? Commander of the 13th Penal Legion, known commonly as the Last Chancers, Colonel Schaefer led me and nearly 4,000 others and a bloody suicide mission. Was it to be the same again? Was I going to spend the next few years being shipped from battle zone to battle zone, wondering every time if this was the fight that would be my last? To be honest, I don't care one bit. If my time in this stinking prison has taught me anything, it's that life on the battlefield, fighting for your life, is far more desirable than sitting on your ass for 9/10 of the day. I knew he would come back for me, though. He didn't just say anything when we left, but I remember his words when we first met, just over 3 years ago. Just my kind of scum, he had called me, shortly before knocking me out. I might add, but these days I wouldn't hold that against him. He's done a lot worse, to me and to others. With a shuddering clank, the conveyor arrives, and the wardens usher me inside. We rattle up a couple of floors to the warden's level, where the washrooms are. I've never come this way before. For the last 5 months, my washing routine has consisted of being hosed down with cold water every other day. I follow the guards without much thought, my mind still occupied with the colonel's arrival. It guarantees nothing but bloodshed and battle. But then, that's all the colonel has ever represented. That and an unbending, uncompromising faith in the emperor, and unswerving loyalty to the Imperium. I've always had plenty of faith, but it wasn't until the Last Chancers that I realized my part in the grand scheme of things. I'm a murdering, cold-hearted bastard, I don't mind admitting, but now I'm one of the Emperor's murdering, cold-hearted bastards, and he has a use for me, again. It gives me some small measure of satisfaction that although all I know how to do now is cripple and kill and maim, I still have a sense of purpose. I never had that before. It's a cruel, hard galaxy out there. And if you're going to survive, you have to learn some cruel, hard lessons. I learned them while 4,000 other Last Chancers didn't. And I'm still here. I figured out all the time that I was in that cell, remembering every battle, every gunshot and stab, that the Emperor and the Colonel weren't finished with me just yet. I reckon neither will be finished with me. Not even after I'm dead, I'm sure. Wow, that was great. Okay. Wow. That was great. Page 308. He foreshadows the fourth novel. Fantastic. I pull off the rag and step into the showering cubicle. The guard turns the water on from outside, and a scathing jet of hot water cascades down on top of me from the grill in the ceiling. He tosses in a gritty bar of soap, and I start scrubbing and scraping. I need to shave, I called out over the splashing water. The guard mumbles, and I don't... I said, can I get a blade? I need to get rid of this fragging hair and beard. You're not allowed sharp implements, Cage, the guard calls back. I'm under orders. For Emperor's sake, you sack of crap. I can't go in front of the colonel looking like a sodden beggar, I argue with him, stepping out of the cubicle. He retreats. He retreats quickly. I point the pistol and then the knife at his belt. If I wanted to kill you, I'd already be a cooling body. I tell him, give me your damn knife before I come and take it off you. He unbuckles the sheath and tosses it over to me, looking ready to bolt at any moment. The look of fear in his eyes sends a shiver of pleasure through me. What I would have done to have had a reputation like this a few years ago back on Olympus. I would have made things a lot It would have made things a lot easier growing up, that kind of terror. I stepped back under the stream of water and lathered the soap across my face and head, then pull the knife out and throw the sheath back on the tilted floor, the tiled floor. My goodness. I think it's time for a couple deep breaths. Couple deep breaths. And some C4. You're not allowed sharp implements, Cage, the guard calls back. I'm under orders. For Emperor's sake, you sack of crap. I can't go in front of the colonel looking like a sodden beggar. I argue with him. Stepping out of the cubicle, he retreats quickly. I point to the pistol and then the knife on his belt. If I wanted to kill you, you'd already be a cooling body, I tell him with a smile. Give me your damn knife before I come and take it off you. He unbuckles the sheath and tosses it over to me, looking ready to bolt it at any moment. The look of fear in his eyes sends a shiver of pleasure through me. What I would have done to have such a reputation like this only a few years back on Olympus. It would have made things a lot easier for me growing up, that kind of terror. I step back under the stream of water and lather the soap across my face and head, then pull the knife out and throw the sheath back out on the tiled floor. I start with hacking off the hair, as close to my skin as I can get, dropping the ends in tufted lumps to swirl down and block the plug hole in the floor. I then shave the beard off, scraping the knife across my cheeks and chin, removing a layer of skin at the same time. It stings more than a lasbolt wound, but I don't mind. I rub my hand against the smooth skin, enjoying the sensation of cleanliness for the first time in ages. My hair is a bit more difficult, but I eventually manage to cut all that off as well, leaving a few nicks and cuts across the back of my scalp where the angle was awkward. Hey, my face was ripped apart and put back together again years ago, so I'm never going to win any medals for good looks anyway. Satisfied I'm as presentable as I'm going to get, I dry myself down with the coarse, scratchy towel, preferred by the guard, while he goes to fetch me something suitable to wear. He returns a short while later with standard prison fatigues, badly made gray baggy trousers, and shirts woven from raw linen, and a pair of ill-fitting laceless boots. I feel like a right idiot wearing these clothes, like a kid who's dressed up in his older brother's gear. I follow the guard back up the elevator for my talk. The guard knocks on the door, and the colonel calls me in. Unlike the rest of the prison tower, the circular hall is decorated with a bright mural that runs continuously along its walls, depicting some ecclesiarchy scene as far as I can tell. Some saint's martyrdom, judging by the final images which portray a man with a glowing halo being torn apart by green-skinned monsters, which I take to be a fanciful interpretation of orcs. I fought real orcs, and in the flesh, they're even scarier than the grotesque parodies painted around the hall. The colonel is sat to one side, behind a plain desk of dark, almost black wood. A simple matching chair is placed across from him. The desktop is piled high with papers and moldering brown sleeves tied with red cord and stamped with various official seals. Cage, the colonel says, looking from the sheaf of parchments in his hand. Sit down. I walk across and lower myself into the chair, which makes squeaking protests from its legs as I settle into it. The colonel has turned his attention back to studying the documents he is holding. I wait there patiently, locked up in that cell. Patience was something I learned quickly. The sort of patience I imagine a hunter has, waiting for his prey, sitting or lying there immobile for hours on end. The sort of patience that tests your sanity, the slow drifting of the hours and days threatening to unravel your mind. But I learned how to settle my thoughts, focusing them inwards, counting my heartbeats, counting my breaths, mentally going over 100 rituals of weapons preparations and maintenance, fighting armed and unarmed combatants with different opponents in the confines of my own head, while my arms and legs were chained to the wall. I realize I've drifted into the well-practiced trance state when the colonel coughs purposefully. I blink and focus on him. He hasn't changed a bit, though. I didn't really expect that he would have. Still, that strong, clean-shaven jaw, sharp cheekbones, and the piercing glare of his ice blue eyes. Eyes that can bore into your soul and burn through you sharper than a las cutter. There is another mission, he begins, sitting back and crossing his arms. I figured as much, I reply, keeping my back straight, my expression attentive. There is not much time, relatively speaking, he continues, his gaze constant. You will assemble and train a team to assassinate an alien military commander. This surprises me. Last time out, he was very defensive about revealing the mission objectives. I guess things are different this time. As you are probably expecting, the selection process will be more directed and focused than last time, he says, as if he can read my mind. I cannot afford the luxury of the time required to repeat the procedure you underwent before. I bet, I think to myself. It took 4,000 soldiers, 2.5 years, to select the last chancers when the colonel had last led me into battle. Other than the colonel himself, I was the only survivor. This prison contains some of the most specialized soldiers in this sector of the Imperium. I have had them incarcerated here for just this purpose, gathered here in one place where I have easy access to them rather than scattered across the stars. It makes assembling a team much more straightforward, with the additional benefit that few people know who they are, and I can maintain absolute secrecy, he tells me, indicating the records on the desk with a sweep of his head. You will go through these files and choose those you deem most appropriate for the mission. You will then train them in the skills they do not possess, while I prepare the final details of the mission itself. I will then lead the last chances on that mission. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir, I answer carefully, mulling his words over in my head. If I'm going to choose, I need to know a little more about what you're planning. For the moment, you do not. I would rather you choose men and women whose skills you value regardless of the exact mission we might face, he says with a shake of his head. Our choice of personnel will, to some degree, inform the plan of attack that I will devise. Flexibility will be the key to success. I think I get you, I tell him, leaning forward and resting my hands on the desk. Pick a team that'll be able to do what we need, whatever it is. Once again, your ability to grasp complex issues astounds me, the colonel replies sarcastically. That is what I said, is it not? Almost, I answer with a grin. Something then occurs to me. Colonel, why use penal troops? I mean, I'm pretty sure you could have your pick of guard regiments across the segmentum. You yourself once told me the answer to that. If you can remember, Schaefer replies after a moment's thought. I can bark orders. I can make men do what I want. But for my missions, that is not enough. I remember now, I say when the colonel pauses. You want a team that has nothing else to live for except succeeding in the mission. It was in Deliverance, wasn't it? Yeah, I remember. Give men nothing except life to fight for, and they'll be the best fighters ever. You learned that well, Schaefer says pointedly. Well, I'm still here, I reply with a bitter smile. There are 276 military personnel in the prison. It takes me just over a week to go through their records. Sitting down with one of the Vinaclarium scribes to read me out their details. I never did learn my letters. There wasn't really any need for it. I see the colonel once in that time to tell me that I've got 3 more days to make my choices. To begin with, I didn't know where to start. The colonel's briefings were so vague. I found it difficult to picture what we could be doing. I spent the first day just sitting and thinking, something I've had plenty of opportunity to do in the recent months. I figure out about 10 or so good fighters will be enough. My experience on Court Norum tells me that on the colonel's missions, if you can't do it with a few trained men, then an army isn't going to help. So I go through all the records with the adept, trying to make some more sense by dividing them up by expertise, previous combat experience, and almost as important, why they're in this prison. There's all kinds of dregs here, but all of them are ex-military. That's not too surprising, considering the colonel's purpose in life. But there's something particular about this bunch of convicts. They're all specialists of one kind or another. They're pilots, snipers, infiltration experts, saboteurs, engineers, jungle fighters, and city fighters. Tank crews, artillerymen, stormtroopers, pioneers, and drop troops. Like the colonel said, he's gathered together some of the best soldiers from across the segmentum, and they're all here for me to choose from. So what am I looking for? How do you pick a team of expert soldiers when I've got a whole company of them to choose from? What could I look for to set them apart from the others? With only 2 days left to decide, my frustration is beginning to build. I need an angle, some way of picking the best. I begin to appreciate more why the colonel did what he did for the last mission. I start to understand that perhaps dragging 4,000 men and women through hell and back and seeing who survives is the only way you can really find out who has that warrior instinct, who the fighters and survivors are, and which ones are just cannon fodder, destined for a bullet to save the life of a better soldier. Perhaps I should just get them to fight it out, pit them against each other, and see who walks out. Then I have a flash of inspiration from the Emperor. Perhaps I can put them through a few battles to see who comes out on top. But I don't have to physically eliminate the weaklings. It's halfway through the night when I send the guards to rouse the adept. I pull on my new uniform, kindly supplied by the colonel. I slip into the plain olive shirt and dark green trousers, pulling the belt nice and tight, and then step into my boots. I can't tell you how good it feels to wear tight, solid combat boots on my feet after months of being barefoot. It makes me feel like a soldier again, not a prisoner. I make my way to where the colonel outlined my task and wait for the adept. A few moments pass when he gets brought into the audience chamber, sleepy and confused. We're going to talk to all the prisoners, I tell him, grabbing the first couple dozen of folders from the desk and thrusting the pile of records into his arms. All of them? He asks squarely, eyes bleary, suppressing a yawn. Yes, all of them, I snap back, pushing him tottering towards the door. Who's first? Juggling awkwardly with the shifting pile of paperwork, he looks at the name of the top folder. Prisoner 1242, Afrim, he tells me as we wait for the elevator. Cell 1312. Now he's going to go interview the prisoners. I already know what happens, and I want to talk about what's going to happen, but I'll just read it instead. One of my favorite parts in the book is coming up, though. And I think it's one of the best parts in all the books. I can talk about that because it doesn't really matter. But he goes to get one of these prisoners, and he's like, "What are you in prison for?" And the guy's like, "I just killed a bunch of women." And Cage is like, "Oh, you're not coming with me." And the guy's like, "All right." And they're just so indifferent. I mean, that guy, he went back to his stupid cell forever. He never got to leave the place again. The guard is asleep on his feet when we step out of the lift onto the 13th floor, leaning against the wall. I give him a push, and he falls to the ground, a startled yelp escaping his lips as he bangs his head on the floor. "Wake up, Warden!" I shout at him, dragging him to his feet. "What's going on?" he asks dizzily, rubbing his eyes. "Open cell 12, I tell him, grabbing his collar and dragging him towards the cell door. "And you will address me as lieutenant or sir. I am an officer." "Sorry, sir," he mumbles, the keys jangling in his shaking hand as he puts them in the lock. He swings the door open as I push him to one side. "You, in here," I snarl at the clericus and step inside the cell. He follows cautiously. The room is just like all the others. Cramped, bare, with a pallet on the ground, along the wall opposite the door. The man inside is already on his feet, fist balled and raised. If ever a man could be described as big, it's this guy. He's easily half my height again, with shoulders like an ogre's and biceps bigger than most men's thighs. He's wearing just his prison trousers, and muscles ripple across his chest as he clenches and unclenches his hands. He's got a broad face and small eyes that are too close together under a heavy brow. I doubt he could count to 10, even using his fingers. "You gonna try to hit me?" I ask casually, closing the door behind me and leaning back against it with my arms crossed. "Where did you drop out of the warp?" Afrim snarls back, taking a step forward. The adept makes a panicked squeak and backs into the corner. "You can't just barge in here. I'm entitled to 6 hours sleep a night. Prison regulations." "Prison regulations say I'm not allowed to kill anyone here as well. But that didn't stop me," I tell him in the same offhand tone. "You're Cage, aren't you?" he asks, suddenly less sure of himself. "I heard about you. You're fragged in the head." "I am Lieutenant Cage of the 13th Penal Legion, the last Chancers, and you better remember that when you address me, soldier," I tell him. The colonel told me he had reinstated my rank when he gave me the uniform, which was kind of nice of him. "Do you expect me to salute?" the prisoner replies with a sneer. "Read it," I say to the clericus, ignoring Afrim. The adept visibly pulls himself together and then clears his throat in a pompous manner. "Colin Afrim, ex-drill sergeant of the 12th Jericho Rangers," he begins in a monotonous drone. "7 years service, 3 campaigns, arrested and court-martialed for brutality of recruits, sentenced to dishonorable discharge and 5 years hard labor, sentence converted to life imprisonment. Order of Colonel Schaefer, 13th Penal Legion. A drill sergeant. I should have guessed it, I say to him, meeting his angry gaze with a cold stare of my own. Like beating up on the new guys, eh? You're no good to me. I need a real soldier, not some training camp bully. Someone who's fought in battle. Why, you little runt, he bellows, hurling himself headlong at me. I sidestep his clumsy charge and ram his face into the metal cell floor. He drops like a stone. I pluck the record from the adept's grip, smiling inwardly at the look of terror on his face, and toss it onto the bed. You can pick that up later. We're done, I tell him, rolling the unconscious Afram out of the way with my foot and opening the door. One down, 275 to go. Eric Corblim, the clericus reads out in a monotonous tone. Ex-Master Sergeant, 4th Asgardian Regiment, 3 years service, 1 campaign, arrested and court-martialed for insubordination on the field of battle, sentenced to 35 lashes, dishonorable discharge, and 10 years imprisonment. Sentence extended to life imprisonment by order of Colonel Schaefer, 13th Penal Legion. Corbin is short and stocky, with a thick mop of red hair and bushy eyebrows. He sits on the edge of his bed, gazing blankly at the floor, hands on his lap. Everything about him says dejected and broken, but I give him a glance. He could prove himself useful. So you don't like taking orders, do you, Corbin? I say, scratching my head. Bit of an odd choice, joining the Imperial Guard. I didn't ask to join, he mumbles back, not looking up. Oh, a draftee, I reply slowly. I bet you must be plenty fragged up then. Dragged into an army you didn't want to fight in, then slammed up in here to rot away the rest of your life. I guess the Emperor really doesn't like you, Corbin. I guess he doesn't, he agrees, meeting my gaze for the first time with a bitter smile. How'd you like to get out of here? Maybe even go back to what you did before, I offer, studying his reaction. It'll mean following more orders, though. I would like that a lot, he nods slowly. I don't mind following orders, unless it's on a suicide mission to storm an enemy bunker. Huh. Well, Corbin, that was the wrong answer, I tell him viciously, slapping his record out of the adept's hands. You won't be seeing me again. Garvius Teenan, the adept mumbles sleepily, barely able to keep his eyes open. We've been at it for a solid 36 hours, going back to the Colonel's audience chamber and picking up more records when we run out, stopping only twice in that time to grab something to eat and drink. He swayed on his feet, on his last reserves of energy, weakling, just like most of the inmates here. Only about a half a dozen or so have impressed me so far. The rest have got serious discipline issues, or are cowards, or would probably kill me as soon as look at me. Ex-marksman, Torbrian consuls, 13 years service, 6 campaigns, arrested and court-martialed for firing on imperial citizens without orders, sentenced to hanging, sentence overturned to life imprisonment by order of Colonel Schaefer, 13th Penal Legion. Teenan is a wiry man, in his early 40s, I guess. He has a grizzled, thin face and a cold, distant edge to his eyes. Like he's not really looking at me. He sloppily stood to attention, fingers fidgeting on the seam of his fatigues. You like the killing, don't you? I tell him, cocking my head to one side and giving him the once over. I bet you used to be a hunter before joining up. That I was, sir. He draws back. Oh. And I was, sir. He draws back. Used to hunt deer and such in the mountains. Then they came and said I could shoot orcs if I wanted to. And that seemed like a good offer. So how come you shot non-combatants? I ask him, wanting to hear the story in his own words. It was in my way, he replies with a matter-of-fact tone and his slight shrug. I shouldn't have been there. How many? I prompt, knowing the answer, but wanting to keep him talking. This guy had some potential. I don't remember exactly, sir, he replies slowly. I think that time it was a dozen or so. I think. That time? I ask, surprised at this admission. How many civilians have you shot? Oh, about 50 odd, I reckon. Maybe a few more, he nods, inwardly confirming his tally. 50? I say incredulously. Okay, so my body count makes that look like a spit in the sea, but at least I was under orders. You're too trigger happy, even for me. Sorry to hear that, sir. He apologizes and gives another slight shrug. With a grateful sigh, the adept drops the file and stumbles out of the cell, and I follow him out. How many does that leave us with? I ask him as we walk back to the elevator. He glances down at the small sheaf of papers left in his hands. 8, Lieutenant. There's 8 you haven't rejected, he tells me, warily, handing the documents to me. You'll be needing those, I tell him, tossing the records back as I step into the lift. Have them mustered in the audience room tomorrow after breakfast, and inform Colonel Schaefer I will meet him there. I'm off for some sleep. My 8 recruits are lined up in the chamber, standing at ease, each of them with their eyes fixed on me. All of them are curious. It didn't take long for the rumor to spread that Psycho Cage was talking to everyone and offering a way to get out of prison. But other than that, they don't have a clue what's going on. 1 or 2 of them shuffle nervously under my gaze. The door swings open and the colonel strides in, wearing his full dress uniform as always. Attention! I bark, and they respond sharply enough. It's one of the reasons they're here. They've got some measure of discipline left in them. What have you got for me, Cage? The colonel asks, walking slowly up the line and eyeing each of them in turn. We start at the left of the line with Morik. He's tall, well-proportioned, handsome, and smart. His blonde hair is cropped short. His face clean-shaven, his eyes bright. He stands rigidly to attention, not a single muscle twitching, his gaze leveled straight ahead. Ex-Commissar Morik, sir, I introduce the colonel, and he nods as if remembering something. An odd one. I'm sure you'll agree. Commissar to a stormtrooper company. Morik here has an exemplary history. He left the School of Progenia with a perfect record. He has been cited for acts of bravery 10 times. After 5 campaigns, he spent 3 years on attachment to the School of Proganium training commissar cadets before being granted his request to return to the battlefield. He has been wounded in action 7 times. On 3 occasions, he refused the offer for honorable discharge and returned to training duties. In short, sir, he is a genuine hero. Then remind me why he is in the military prison, Lieutenant, Schaefer says sourly. The commissar and his stormtrooper company were participating in a night drop attack as part of an anti-insurrection operation in Seferia, I tell the colonel, dragging back to the details I spent most of the night committing to memory. The attack was a complete success. The enemy camp was destroyed. All foes eliminated with no prisoners as ordered. The problem was, it was the wrong target. Some departmental mapmaker had mixed up his coordinates with our hero here and led his men on an attack to the command camp of the 25th Hoplites. They wiped out their entire general staff, without loss, I should point out. I smile at Morik, who has remained dispassionate to the whole story. To cover their own hides, the Departamento charged the entire company with failing to carry out orders, and they were drafted into the penal legions. That's when you came in and transferred the hero here. A genuine mistake, but probably the only innocent man in this whole prison. You must hate him, Cage, the colonel says, giving me an intent stare. Of course, sir, I reply tight-lipped. So why have you chosen him? He asks, turning his attention to the ex-commissar. Some measure of revenge, perhaps? Not at all, Colonel, I reply with all honesty. This man will follow your orders to the letter, with no questions. He has almost unmatched combat experience, discipline, and faith. He is certainly dedicated to the Emperor and will do anything to ensure our mission is a success. I personally can't stand him, sir. You're right. But if I want somebody watching my back, our hero here is the best for it. The colonel just grunts and steps to the next in line. He's short and wiry, bald as a cannonball, but with a bushy beard, so that you could be mistaken for thinking someone turned his face upside down. Hands aisle, I tell the colonel, looking down at the little man's shiny scalp, puckered by a jagged scar above his right ear. Formerly served on a recon platoon for 8 years. Isle here is the best scout I could find. He has actual combat experience in desert, forest, jungle, and urban war zones. I think he likes the wilderness a bit too much, though. He deserted whilst fighting on Tabrak too, slipping away while on picket duty. He survived out in the plains for 18 weeks before the advance of the rest of the army caught up with him, and he was captured. He's resourceful and has proven he can act on his initiative. Any other reasons for choosing him? Schaefer asks, a slight scowl creasing his brows. I do not want another desertion halfway through a mission, he adds pointedly, referring to my numerous escape attempts during the last tour of duty. Well, sir, because he hates being locked up in a cell even more than I do, and will do anything to get out of here, I explain. I do have a slight doubt, but I think that Isle will be more willing to see the mission out to the end than try to go on alone. Of course, I don't say this to the colonel. Schaefer gives the man another hard stare before moving on. This is Paulo Regis. I indicate the next man in line. He's about my height and build, a bit flabby around the waist and face, with pallid skin and a crooked nose. He's the most nervous of the bunch, his eyes flickering between me and the colonel, fear mixed with flashes of hatred in them. A gunner sergeant for 7 years, our friend Paulo has extensive siege and bombardment experience. I continue as the colonel turns his ice blue eyes on Regis. Our greedy gunnery sergeant was caught looting in the ruins of Bassison Hive on Flanders World against explicit orders from his captain. A looter? The colonel exclaims with a glance, eyes still fixed on Regis. One who was sentenced to hang for it under your intervention, Colonel, I point out. Not only that, there was a great deal of suspicion that looting wasn't all he did. Some might call it outright pillage, or worse. But there is no way to prove it. He's unadulterated scum, sir, but I think he has learned the importance of following orders. Regis gives a grunt and a nod, and a look of irritation passes across Schaefer's face. Did I give you word to move, Regis? No, sir. He stutters back, a panicked look in his eyes. Then don't move, I snarl, looking annoyed at being shown up like this in front of the colonel. If it gets screwed up now, we'll all be enjoying the hospitality of this tower for the rest of our lives. That's something I definitely don't want. I glance at the colonel to see his reaction, but he's now concentrating on the next soldier. Sniper First Class Tanya Stardust, I announced as the colonel looks up and down, his face a mask. Tanya's not bad to look at, though. I wouldn't go as far as to say she's pretty either. She has short-cut raven hair with soft brown eyes, full-lipped, with prominent cheekbones. She's a few inches shorter than me, with the well-muscled build you'd expect a soldier to have. Without a doubt, she's the best shot in the prison, probably in the sector. 456 confirmed kills over 9 years of service. Has won 38 regimental and inter-regiment shooting medals, also awarded 3 medals for acts beyond the call of duty. She's in here for refusing to fire on the enemy, something which she did 4 times before being court-martialed. She was involved in an unfortunate accident that left the royal nurseries of Minos a flaming ruin and killed 20 children, including the imperial commander's heir. She was exonerated of blame by all investigation conducted by the Inquisition, but since has been unable to shoot except on the firing range. Don't let that fool you into thinking she's had it, though. There is a suspicion that she's fired on that nursery on purpose. You have brought me a sniper who refuses to shoot? The colonel asks doubtfully, one eyebrow raised. I fail to see your reasoning, Gage. Well, sir, you must have thought she would be some use when you had her sent here for your collection, I point out, my inescapable logic earning a scowl from Schaefer. If nothing else, she knows more about shooting than either of us, and had training experience. Anyway, I add, giving Tanya my hardest stare, I will get her to shoot again. Colonel Schaefer's expression remains doubtful, his eyes lingering on me for a few seconds. I hold up under his close scrutiny, meeting his gaze evenly. The expressionless mask the colonel usually wears for a face drops back into place, and he moves along the other place to Loden Strelli. If ever a man looks shifty and untrustworthy, it's Strelli, slim-built and long-limbed. It's like he was stretched as a baby or something. Even his face is long, with a pointed chin and high forehead, separated by an arrowhead of a nose. He looks at me with narrowed eyes and a clenched jaw, assessing me, trying to gauge what sort of man I am. Strelli here is the team shuttle pilot, should we need one, I explained to the colonel. Originally a pirate for Sebastian mining asteroids, Pilot Strelli saw the error of his ways when the Orcs invaded that system 8 years ago. Under his court-martial, he served as a shuttle pilot, and then later on a Thunderbolt interceptor. It was during this time, and despite becoming a widely known and respected fighter ace, that he took the rivalry between the Guard and the Navy a little bit too far by strafing an armored infantry column belonging to the Fighting First of Tethys. The colonel of the Tethys First demanded the Navy turn Strelli over to them and be subject to their justice, as he was duly convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. Your intervention saved him. This time the colonel says nothing, staring long and hard at Strelli, as if trying to pin him to the wall with his stare. The pilot shifts uncomfortably under the unremitting icy gaze, and I notice his long fingers beginning to tap nervously on his thighs. As the colonel's harsh scrutiny continues, Strelli's eyes begin looking towards the door, and I think he's going to bolt. At that moment, the colonel turns his attention away and steps on. Strelli darts a quizzical look at me. His earlier cockiness gone, I ignore him. Next, we have Trooper Quinlan, formerly of the new Bastion 18th Regiment, who's here because of his inability to curb his curiosity and pay attention to the warnings of his superiors. The first thing that springs to mind when looking at Quinlan is square. He's short, he's broad, straight shoulders, a lantern jaw, and a flat head. Even his ears are almost square. Standing to attention, perfectly immobile, you might think he was a sculpture by an apprentice who hasn't worked out the finer points of the human form yet. It appears he can't stop messing about with machinery, I continue hastily at the colonel's prompting stare, pulling thoughts away from the soldier's strange appearance. Following several complaints from servants of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and despite reprimands from his senior officers, Quidlin here continued to make unauthorized alterations to the weapons and vehicles of his tank platoon. Fed up with him, and wisely not wanting to start a feud with the tech priest, his superiors eventually charged him with insubordination. Why did you not heed the warnings you were given? The colonel asked Quidlin, the first time he's spoken directly to any of the prisoners since I came in. I'd like to know how things work, sir. And the changes I made didn't do any harm. They made the engines and guns work better. The trooper replies quickly, the words coming out in tumbled bursts, like a stubber firing on semi-auto. And why do you think you are here, trooper? The colonel continues his questioning. Here? Now? In this line? With the others? And you? And Lieutenant? Or here in this prison, sir? I was amazed by the speed of his talking when we first met, but I soon realized it's because that's how fast his brain works. It does have the unfortunate effect of making a very smart man sound very stupid, though. And I can imagine why his talents have been overlooked by others who might not have realized this. In the chamber now, the colonel confirms, with these other prisoners. Well, sir, I don't know for sure why I'm here, but I might hazard a guess, considering everything I've learned so far, and my conversation with Lieutenant yesterday, that perhaps I might be able to be useful to you, sir, because I know how to fix things. Quidlin bursts out, looking around at Schaefer. You might be, agrees the colonel with a nod before taking a couple of paces along the line. I have no idea what rock you turned over to find this one, I say, looking at him. The man appears unremarkable in every way. Average height, average build, dark brown hair, gray eyes, plain-looking face with no distinguishing features. His record was strangely short as well, and those bits that were in it were vague. But what was there made an interesting read. Well, interesting listening as it turned out, but that's not the point. Onius Trost, a former expert in sabotage and terrorism, I announced to Schaefer. I'm still an expert, Trost growls beside me. Did I tell you to open your mouth? I snarl back, face inches from his. His eyes meet mine, and a shiver runs down my spine. They're dead. I mean, absolutely emotionless, flat, like they're painted on. It's a look that tells me I could be on fire, bleeding to death, and he would just walk back without a second glance. Try me. I know. Try me. I'll show you what cold-blooded is, I whisper in his ear, regaining my composure. I will remember this one, the colonel says, pushing to me and squaring off with Trost. I remember this one very well, actually. Trost, covert agent of the Officio Sabotorum. He has probably killed more people than everyone in this tower put together, including you and me, Cage. I remember that he made a mistake that ended up poisoning 3 admirals and their families. Trost is trying to stare us down, but I am not giving him an inch. If I show weakness now, he'll know it, and I'll have a hard time imposing my authority later if I need to. Who is this final one? The colonel asks, pointing to the last man in line. This is Peter Stronberg, field surgeon of the 12th Corporian Armored Cavalry, sir, I tell Schaefer, tearing my eyes away from Trost. The surgeon is gaunt, with dark skin and thinning black hair, and a nervous tick in his right eye. He looks at the colonel with wide, bloodshot eyes. While on campaign in Phyllis Skindra, he became addicted to a strange cocktail of stims and pain suppressants of his own making. Not only did this affect his performance, losing 5 times more patients than he saved by the end of the campaign, he began to distribute the substance to the troopers in return for favors and money. Do you think his medical expertise will prove useful on this mission? The colonel says to derisively. He looks dead on his feet. I would not trust him to open a pill bottle, and would never consider letting him near me with a cauterizer. He's been here 3 years, Colonel, and cannot sleep more than 4 hours a night due to his long term addiction, I explained. However, he has acted as prison doctor for the last year to the satisfaction of the governor. We will see about that, the colonel grunts, darting a glance back at me. The colonel clasps his hands behind his back and turns on the spot, striding to stand in the middle of the room in front of the recruits. I walk over to stand just behind him and to his left. He looks up and down the line a couple more times, weighing up the merits of each of them in his head. I'm not sure whether it's them he's judging or me for choosing them. They all seem satisfactory, Cage, he says quietly to me, not turning around. But we will see how much of them passes the final test and which will fail. Final test, sir? I ask worriedly. I can't think what the colonel has in mind. I thought I'd covered every angle. My name is Colonel Schaefer, he barks out, his voice strong and filling the chamber. I am the commanding officer of the 13th Penal Legion. He glances towards us for a second, which some of you may have heard being called the Last Chancers. It was I who brought you all to this prison, and I now stand before you to offer you a choice. I need soldiers, fighters like you, to take part in a dangerous mission. It is likely that many of you, or perhaps all of you, will not survive the mission. You will be subjected to the most ruthless training that Lieutenant Cage here can devise, and I will expect total obedience. In return for your dedication to this duty, I offer you a full pardon for the crimes which you have been convicted. Survive my mission, and you will be free to pursue whatever lives you can. If you do not survive, you will be pardoned posthumously, so that your souls will be cleansed and your sins, and you will ascend to join the Emperor. Remember that a life not spent in service to the Emperor is a life doubly wasted, in this world and the next. I also remind you that you all swore oaths of loyalty and service to the Emperor and the Imperium that serves him, and I again offer you the opportunity to fulfill those oaths. I look at the colonel. He stood back, with ramrod straight, hands held easily in the small of his back. I can't see his face, but I remember the last time he gave that speech to me and nearly 4,000 soldiers over 3 years ago. It wasn't exactly the same speech, but I recall his face. It radiates confidence and sincerity, those blue eyes shining with pride. He truly believes he is here to save our souls from damnation, and maybe he is. My old friend, Frank, certainly believes so. And after what I went through in the Last Chancers, I'm damn sure I earned myself some recognition. Morik, he says, looking at the ex-commissar. Do you volunteer for this duty? I do, sir. He booms back, and I can picture him now, striding through the bullets and lasbolts, his voice like a clarion call to the soldiers around him. It will be an honor and a privilege to serve the Emperor again. Ow, the colonel calls out. Do you volunteer for this duty? If it means I get out of that cell, then yes, the recon man replies, with an emphatic nod of his head. Regis, do you volunteer for this duty? He asked the gunnery sergeant. Regis hesitates, glancing along the line to his left and right, and then back at the colonel. I don't want to die, he mumbles, his eyes cast downward as he says it. I'd rather stay here, sir. I can see the colonel stiffen, as if Regis has just insulted his mother or something. I offer you one last chance, Regis, Schaefer says, his voice dropping low, a sheer sign that he's angry. Do you volunteer for this duty? You fraggers can go to hell, answers Regis, his sadness suddenly replaced by rage, lunging towards the bolt pistol hanging from the colonel's belt. I'm not going anywhere with you madmen. I'll kill the fragging lot of... The Schaefer jumps Schaefer steps into his rush, brings the heel of his hand into Regis's jaw, and hurls him backwards to the ground with a single blow. He scrabbles to his feet and takes a swing at the colonel, but I get there first, smacking a solid punch across his right nose, spraying blood everywhere, and spinning him to the ground again. I am truly sorry to hear that, the colonel replies solemnly, unmoved by the attack. By failing to volunteer, you have proven to me and the Emperor that you are no longer faithful or a useful servant. Your presence in this facility is no longer warranted. By the authority invested in me as a commanding officer of the Emperor's judiciary, your sentence of life imprisonment is revoked. The colonel continues. A smile creeps across Regis's face. When the colonel unbuckles the flap of his bolt pistol holster, the smile fades, replaced by a look of horror. I hereby sentence you to death, to be carried out immediately. Lieutenant Cage, do your duty. He pulls out the bolt pistol and holds it for me to take. It feels heavy in my hands, smelling of fresh gun oil. It's the first time I've held a gun in months, and its weight is reassuring. Don't move, and it'll be quick, I tell Regis, aiming the pistol at his head. Regis ignores me and leaps to his feet, sprinting towards the chamber door. I head after him, but Trost intervenes, tackling him to the ground. The two roll across the ground, scuffling and exchanging short punches with each other, as Regis tries to break free. I catch up with them and bring the butt of my pistol across Regis's forehead, stunning him. Pushing Trost aside, I place a booted foot across Regis's throat, pinning him in place. He tries to struggle a moment longer, hurling threats at me before going limp. Tears stream down his face, a dark patch spreading from the crotch of his gray fatigues. Take your punishment like a soldier, I hiss at him, sickened, leveling the bolt pistol at his left eye. One smooth pull of the trigger is all it takes, the crack of the bolt's detonation ringing off the walls as the explosive round blows Regis's skull apart, splattering my legs with blood and shards of bone. I step back, the bolt pistol smoking slightly, and look at the others. Quidlin looks aghast. Strelly wears a savage grin. Morik is still standing to attention, eyes fixed straight ahead. The others look at me with a blank expression. Death is no stranger to them. Good. Because before this mission is out, I'm sure they'll see plenty more. I return the colonel's pistol to him and shout at the others to fall in line again. Schaefer continues as if there had been no distraction at all, asking each in turn if they volunteer for the duty he has chosen for them. They all say yes. The second novel in general is just really like straightforward, which I don't know, not that bad. After all the intrigue and all the adventuring of the first one, it's not that bad. Oh, the turtles are getting smaller. No. The crackling flames in the grate blazed with a shower of sparks as the room's occupant dropped another log into the fire. Rubbing his hands together, he returned to the low, leather-covered armchair at the one side of the fireplace. He was lean, with hooded eyes, his dark hair slicked back, a perfectly groomed goatee beard adorning his chin. He was wearing a heavy shirt of dark blue wool, tied at the collarless neck with a golden cord, with which he fidgeted while he was waiting. His long legs were stretched out in front of him, clad in tight trousers, made from the same material as the shirt. He glanced interestedly around the room, at the red lacquered paneling on the walls, and the ceiling-high bookshelf that stretched several meters along the center of one wall. A clock stood upon the mantel, apparently carved from ivory or bone, ticking methodically above the sound carved from ivory or bone. Oh, from the sound of the fire. Turning his attention back to the bookshelf, the man stood and slowly walked over to study the assembled volumes. He ran his fingers over their spines, head cocked to one side to read their titles. At that moment, the door behind him opened with the clicking of a latch. Turning, he greeted his host with a smile. The other man was much older, his face creased like a crumpled parchment, but his eyes were clear and bright. A few wisps of white were all that remained of his hair, and he leaned heavily on a walking cane. Gestamore, it is so long since we last met, the younger man said, stepping forward and laying an affectionate hand on the old man's shoulder. It is, Gestamore replied shortly, his voice firm and strong. I fear that both of us pay more attention to our duties than our friendship. It cannot be any other way, the visitor said matter-of-factly, helping the aging man to the chair. Come and sit, and we will talk. The younger man took a straight-back chair from the front of the study's desk and sat opposite Gestamore, leaning forward with his arms on his knees, hands clasped together. You look much older than I had imagined. Yes, Lucius, I am old, Gestamore agreed, nodding his head slowly. But I have a few more years of grace left in me, and my mind is as sharp as ever. He tapped his temple in illustration. Why do you submit yourself to this? You know there are ways to redeem your aging. To be human is to be mortal, the aging man replied philosophically. To deny that is to invite the thoughts of immortality, which is the province of the blessed emperor alone. That, or the gift of the dark powers we must thwart. To deny my mortality is to deny my humanity, and all that I have fought hard to protect in others. The two sat there in silence for a few moments, the comfortable silence allowed by many years of familiarity. It was Gestamore who spoke next. turning his gaze from the flames and the grate to look at Lucius. You didn't travel across 7 sectors to inquire after my health, he pointed out. You received the data link I sent? Lucius asked, sitting back, his expression businesslike. I did, and I say you are playing with fire, Gestamore answered sternly. But you will have whatever aid you need from me. It is advice that I need now more than anything, old friend, Lucius explained. You are right. The endeavor is risky, but the potential rewards are well worth the hazards. For all that, I would prefer some more surety that I currently have. I may need to act swiftly and strongly and decisively. I am not sure that the men I have are equal to that demand. Ah, that is simple. Gestamore dismissed his comrade's worries with a wave of his veiny hand. Invoke the old oaths. Rouse the brotherhood to duty once more. Such things should not be done lightly, Lucius replied with caution. The brotherhood is intended for use in extreme cases. Besides which, subterfuge and stealth are my weapons as ever. If you need their intervention, then the time for deception and intrigue will have long passed, Gestamore countered, rubbing a hand over his bald head. Just take a single brother, for surety, as you said. I will consider your advice, Lucius said thoughtfully, looking into the flames and remembering the battles of the past. Your additional training begins immediately, announces the colonel as we board the shuttle. The wind whipping across the landing pad as we make our way across the gantry. Lieutenant Cage has my full authority when I am not present. You will do exactly as he tells you. Your lives will depend on your maintaining discipline and learning everything you and he have to teach each other. The interior of the shuttle is better furnished than those I'm used to. In a place of long wooden benches, the main compartment has individual seats, 6 rows of 3 inside a central aisle, upholstered with black padded leather, pillow-like headdrests, hung with safety restraints, with gilded buckles and clasps. Luxurious seats are obviously for the comfort of more important imperial servants than us. Still, it's ours for the moment. And I settle into one of the seats near the back, enjoying the sensation after 5 months of being manacled to a wall. To my surprise, the colonel comes and sits next to me. You do understand your position, Cage? He asks, strapping himself to his harness. I think so, sir, I reply after a moment. I have to turn this bunch of misfits into a fighting team. I mean, that I only offer one last chance, Shaver says. You have already squandered that. There is no pardon for you this time. I had already suspected as much, though it's still a blow hearing it said so bluntly. Still, this is it. There is no pardon, no end to the fighting except death. I'm surprised by my own feelings. I find myself strangely calm. I get the weirdest sense of detachment, of someone else taking control of my life. It's an odd feeling, hard to explain. My whole life, I fought against everything. I fought to get out of the hives on Olympus. I fought boredom on the world of Styges, and it ended up in the Last Chancers. I fought for 2.5 years to escape the colonel and the death that I was sure he was waiting for, that he had waiting for me. I fought against the guilt and depression of being the only survivor from Court Norum and failed. And for the last 6 months, I fought to get out of prison and against the growing madness that all the fighting had been building in my head. I realized that, as last time, even if I was free, I would still be fighting. I don't know how to do anything else. Call it my destiny, my fate, if you like. Perhaps it's part of the Emperor's scheme for me, to fight until I die. Maybe that's all I have to offer him. It's then that I'm struck by a revelation, astonished. It didn't occur to me earlier. That's why I am here, why the colonel has chosen me, and why I survived when thousands of others died. I fight. It's what I do. Perhaps I might have been able to change given the chance, but the colonel made sure that that never happened. With 2.5 years of constant bloodshed and battle, I have become his creature. Now I really am his type of scum. I understand, sir, I tell Schaefer, looking at him next to me. Oh, yes, I understand exactly what he's done to me and what he's turned me into. Like I said, given a chance, I might have changed. But my last chance was just to keep on living, not to have a normal life. This existence is the only one that's left for me now, thanks to Schaefer. Good, he says shortly, leaning his head back. There's one other thing, Colonel, I say through gritted teeth. He looks over the corner of his eye. I hate you for what you've done to me, and one day I'll kill you for it. But not today, Cage, he replies with a grim smile. Not today. No, sir, not today, I agree, leaning my head back. I close my eyes and picture my hands around his throat, and I drift off into a contented sleep. The day cycle begins with glow strips in my room, flickering to life. I push myself out of my bunk and dress quickly, pulling on my new uniform. Stepping through the door that links my chambers to the team's dormitory, I see that most of them are still asleep. Only Stronenberg wakes up in my direction as I walk in. Wake up, you lazy, fat, useless sacks of sump filth! I bellow at them, walking along the room and kicking at their beds. You are supposed to be soldiers, not babies. Drop dead, soldier boy, snarls Strelly, swinging from his bunk and landing on his feet in front of me. You may think you're the man in charge because the colonel says so, but you push me and I'll kick the living hell out of you. I heard Tross step up behind me, and I turned slightly to take a step back and keep them both in view. I'm with the Navy man on this one, Tross says hoarsely, his dead eyes meeting my gaze. You know how many people I've killed? Adding you to the list won't even make me blink. I say nothing, keeping my voice impassive. I look at the others. Morik is ignoring me, putting on his prison fatigues, his back to me. Tanya sits at the edge of her bunk, swinging her feet, not joining, but certainly not leaping to my defense. Quidlin looks a bit confused, his eyes shifting between me, Strelly and Trost, trying to judge which side to be on. If he has any sense, it'll be my side. Isle is still on his back, arms behind his head, looking blankly at the ceiling and pretending nothing is happening. Finally, I look back at Strelly. I think a little discipline is needed around here, I say to him, crossing my arms. What are you going to do? He taunts me. Put us in explosive collars? I don't need to, I tell him quietly. He smirks just a moment before my fist thunders into his face, smashing a tooth free and slamming him into one of the metal bedposts. Quick as lightning, I spin on Trost, who stood with a dumbfounded expression, which turns to one of intense agony as I drive my boot into his groin, crumping him to the floor. You could have done this the easy way, I say to all of them. Trost squirms about on the floor, and Strelly pushes himself upright, keeping his distance. Your last chancers now. That means you are the lowest scum in the galaxy. That means you're going to do what I tell you, and you're going to wish you were dead. If you go up against me, I will break you into little pieces and shove the leftovers out of an airlock. And if any of you think you can take me out, then please have a go. But make sure you do it right, because if I survive, you won't. What is this? I asked. Oh, what is this? I asked Stronenberg, holding my knife up in front of his face. It's the first day of real training aboard the ship Laurels of Glory, a fine vessel, no mistaking. Purpose-built for stormtroopers, the colonel informs me, the Laurels of Glory has got just about everything you might want. Right now, we're stood in one of the combat bays. The ship has 14, each of them rigged out to represent all sorts of war zones and maintained by a veritable army of tech priests. There's a jungle bay, a city bay, a desert bay, a night world bay, shooting ranges, drill quadrants, and even a beach on one of them. I've not actually seen any of them, so I'm kind of curious to see how you can make a jungle on a spaceship. Trees are made out of planks, perhaps. The best thing there is that there's an armory you could overthrow a hive city with, housing all kinds of lethal kit I'm just itching to get my hands on. But that's for later. For now, we have to start with the basics. It's a knife, he replies bluntly, a dumb look on his face. Do I have a rank, Trooper Stronenberg? I rasp at him. You're a lieutenant, he answers quickly. I mean, you're a lieutenant, sir. That's better, I say, stepping back, brandishing the knife towards him. What is this? It's a knife, sir, he replies sharply. Wrong, I bark back. What is this? I don't understand, sir, he answers hesitantly, looking at the others gathered around me. This bay is just an exercise hall, a wide open space for running, close combat training, rope climbing, and such. We're stood in the middle of the chamber, the others forming a circle around me. I fold the knife above my head and turn around slowly, looking at each of them. Can any of you tell me what this is? I ask them, spinning the knife between my fingers. It's a Cervantes pattern general issue combat knife, sir, answers Quidlin. Standard close combat ornament for many Imperial Guard regiments, originating from Cervantes Forge World. Is that a fact, Brains? I ask, looking at the knife in mock amazement. I suspect you could tell me all sorts of interesting things about this knife, couldn't you? That particular knife, sir? Or that kind of knife? He asks innocently. What? I reply, startled. Emperor's blood. You think too much, Quidlin. I take a moment to gather my thoughts again, closing my eyes and trying to put Quidlin out of my mind. Taking a deep breath, I open my eyes and look around the circle one more time. A couple more exchanging glances with each other. Trost looks bored, standing with his arms crossed. His eyes gaze on the ceiling. This is not a knife that I hold, I bark at them, my voice ringing off the distant bulkheads of the training bay. I hold a weapon in my hand. The purpose of a weapon is to inflict injury and death. This is a man's death. They look at me with more interest now, intrigued to where the speech was going. Hey, Trost, what is the meaning of a weapon? I snap at the saboteur, who is still standing around the hall. He glances at me. The purpose of a weapon is to inflict injury and death, sir. The purpose of a weapon is to inflict injury and death, sir. His voice is flat, emotionless, his expression vain. Why? What is so fragging interesting that you think you can ignore me, Trooper Trost? I shout at him, dropping the knife and striding up at him. Am I boring you, Trost? I was working out how much thermal charges would be needed. I was working out how many thermal charges would be needed to blast through one of these bulkheads. He replies, meeting my gaze finally. A real demolition man, aren't you? I say, squaring up the Trost. He smirks at me. My fist smashes into his jaw just before he realizes I'm even swinging at him, knocking him to his knees. He tries to fend off my next blow with a waved arm, so I grab his left wrist in both hands, twisting it forward and pitching him face first on the floor, putting a foot on his shoulder. I wrench on his arm, and the joint opens up like a cork, Trost spitting through gritted teeth. Your thermal charges didn't help much, did they, demolition man? Try setting one of your bombs now. I step back, letting his dislocated arm drop to the floor. He pushes himself to his knees with his good arm, groaning and darting murderous looks at me. Stronenberg, fix that, I tell the surgeon, pointing to where Trost is. This'll hurt, the medico warns Trost, taking a tight grip of his arm and twisting it back into place with an audible click, making him cry out loud. Right. Everyone will pay attention to what I have to say. Is that understood? I asked him, daring any with my stare. Stronenberg helps Trost to his feet before taking his place in the circle again. I don't give a frag whether any of you live or die. You can be sure of that. I do care whether I live or die. And that means I have to rely on scum like you. Make no bones about it. If the Colonel thinks any of us are not shaping up, the chances are he'll put a bolt into all of us and start afresh. So you best be acting like you are. Listen to me, and we'll all live. Ignore me, and we'll all be friggin' shafting. Isle raises a hand, and I give him the nod to speak. Who the hell are you, sir? He asks. I am the man the colonel visited a dozen kinds of hell upon and survived, I reply slowly, gesturing for the others to gather around in front of me, so I don't have to keep turning around to look at all of them. I am the man who helped the colonel kill 3 million people. I am the only one to survive when 4,000 others died in the battlefield. I have killed men in their sleep. I have shot them. I have stabbed them. I have strangled them. I have even beaten them to death with my hands. I have fought Tyranids and orcs. I have marched across Syrian deserts and frozen wastelands. I've nearly died 6 times. My own men have tried to kill me on more than one occasion. I fought things you don't know exist, and I killed them. Every word of it is true now, and they can tell it by the look in my eye. Even Trost, who shows the first sign of any feelings at all, a little glimmer of respect. But none of that matters, I carry on, walking up and down in front of them, looking at each of them in turn. I am Lieutenant Cage, your training officer. I will do what the hell I like to who the hell I like, when and where the hell I like. And there's nothing in the Emperor's wide galaxy you can do or say to stop me. And it will be the very worst time of your life. But, as the Colonel said, if you want your pardon and to live to hold it in your hand and walk free, then you will listen to what I say and do exactly what I tell you to do. If just one of you messes up, I'll frag you all. I leave them with the thought of that for a while, picking up the knife as I walk to the far end of the training hall. I smile to myself. I once said I'd be a great training instructor if it wasn't for my lousy temper. Now I'm here. I figure my lousy temper is the best weapon in my arsenal. That and the knowledge that my own life depends on these boneheads, shaping up to the Colonel's satisfaction. I look back at them and can hear them talking amongst themselves. They're a long way from becoming fighting men, but their mutual hatred of me will bring them together. That's why I plan it anyways. It worked for me. My loathing of the Colonel and everything he stands for gave me the determination to survive. I'll dare them to die on me. Prove to me how weak they really are. I'll break them and put them back together. And to be honest, I'll enjoy every minute of it. Why? Because other than actual battle, it's the only thing I have left in my life to take pleasure in. I toy with the knife in my hands, standing there looking at them. They're all veterans. They all think they're special. It's an illusion. I've seen first-timers walk through a battle with honors, while old campaigners got blown to bits or broke down and cried. Time served means nothing to me. I don't care how good they think they are, what they think they're capable of. I've seen men push their limits of sanity and endurance. I was one of them. The Colonel tells me I've got about 2 months to work on them, 2 months to turn them into a fighting force he's willing to lead into battle. And then there's an odd thing. Why is the Colonel leaving this to me? Why did he leave me in the Viniclarium with the others? To be dragged out again later, like an old sword handed down from the father to son. It's a trend that started when he put me in charge the last time around, just before False Hope, and the horrors of the God Plant. Even back then, did we have something like this in mind? I'm certain he knew I'd be fighting for him again, if I survived Court Norum. The fact that he caught up with me so quickly proved that. I give myself a mental slip. All this thinking and pondering is a symptom of the prison we'd been left behind. I don't have time to stand around and think. I have work to do. I realize I'm going to have to train myself. 6 months in that cell may have sharpened my philosophy skills, but they've blunted my battle readiness. Idly tossing the knife from hand to hand, I walk back to the group. What is the purpose of a soldier? I call out to them as I approach. They answer with shrugs and shaking heads. To follow orders and fight for the Emperor, sir, suggests Isle, handing a half-raised head. Pretty close, I agree, looking at the knife, but before turning my gaze on them. The purpose of a soldier is to kill for the Emperor. Any fool can fight, but a true soldier kills. He kills whoever he's told to kill, whenever he's told to kill. Battles are not won by fighting, they are won by killing. An enemy who can fight you is not a problem. An enemy who can kill you, there you have a threat. Which of you claims to be a soldier? I've killed more men than can be counted, sir. Tross steps forward. By your reckoning, that makes me a soldier. How did you kill them? I asked, setting the knife spinning on his pommel on the tip of my index finger. Did you stab any of them? No. I've never had to stab a man, he admits. I use explosives, gas, and poison. If I had to fight a man hand to hand, that meant I'd been discovered, which meant my mission had failed. I've never failed a mission. I'm sure those 3 admirals thought very highly of you as they died, I sneer. The mission was completed. Normally, a few additional deaths are allowed, he states coldly. I focus my attention on Strelly and point a knife at him. Are you a soldier, Flyboy? I ask him. He opens his mouth to reply, but at that moment I whip around and hurl the knife into Throst's left foot, pinning it to the floor. He shrieks and kneels over, pulling the knife free with both hands. He lets it clatter to the floor in a bloody puddle. You forgot to call me sir. One more time, demolition man, and I will do a whole lot worse to you, I growl at Trost. Well, Strelly, I ask, turning back to the pilot, are you a soldier? Not by your definition, sir, he tells me, glancing at Trost squirming on the floor, hands clutching around his bleeding foot. I flew a few shuttles and fighters. Never fought face to face with an enemy. Do you want to become a soldier now, Flyboy? I challenge him. Not with you, sir. He smiles back cockily. You'll cut me to pieces. Yes, I will, I assure him with a grim smile. Sir, I hear Stronenberg ask to my right. I didn't turn around. I already knew who was going to ask. Nobody gets treatment until I say so, I tell him, still looking at Strelly. I hear a grunt and then a thud of feet and spin to my left. Trost plunges the knife down at my face, but I catch the blade on the outside of my left forearm and deflect it anyways. Even as he tumbles off balance, my right foot connects with the outside of his left knee, buckling his leg and pitching him to the floor. I'd wait until I've taught you how to use a knife properly before you do that again, I tell him, pulling the blade from his blood-coated fingers. The others are staring at me. My arm has to be precise. Blood is dripping from my fingertips on the clean wooden planks. I check out the wound. It isn't severe, not much more than a layer of skin taken off. If this is the most blood you see in the next couple of months, I'm going too easy on you, I tell them with a grin. Enough of the theory for today. I'm going to show you how to use that knife like a soldier.